So welcome everyone to this session on sustainable cost recovery. We'll just allow people to come in over a couple minutes. My name is Juliette Willits. I'm a professor at the University of Technology, Sydney. And while you're waiting, if you'd like to scan the QR code that you see on the slide in front of you, or type in the number to menti.com. There's just a question for you to have a think about as we just wait for people to come into the session. So we'll just wait another minute or so. Okay, so we might get started. So if we go back to full screen on the presentation. So welcome everyone to this session on sustainable cost recovery, fundamental for equitable, sustained sanitation services. I'm Juliette Willits. I'm a professor at the University of Technology, Sydney, and we've got a lineup of a whole variety of different inputs from different parts of the globe today. We'll be starting with a framing presentation, followed by a look from the global to the national level, and from there to the city level. We'll zoom in on an example in Sinnar in India. And then we'll be hearing from a panel who are all people working in the public sector in Ghana, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. And that will be followed by some inspiration on a tool that can help you think about how to address financing in a systematic way. And we'll finish with some closing remarks. So for the framing presentation, I'd like to introduce Dr. Naomi Carrard, who is a research director at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology, Sydney. And her work at the Institute is transdisciplinary and applied, which means that she works in partnership with civil society, with governments and practice organisations on a range of water, sanitation and sustainability issues. And with that, I will hand over to you, Naomi.
Thanks so much, Juliette. I'm really excited to be part of this session and kicking things off with a framing presentation. And this presentation draws on several years of work that my institute, the Institute for Sustainable Futures, has been undertaking in partnership with SNV. So I'm presenting on behalf of myself, Juliette, and Antoinette Combe today. And before we get into the meat of the presentation, I was hoping to share the results of the Menti, but it looks like it's not going to cooperate today, so we'll come back to that later. So we'll move straight on to what I'd like to share today, which is essentially a proposition. So the idea that we're missing some terms to talk about urban sanitation financing in ways that leads us towards equity and sustainability. And in this session, you're going to be hearing various presentations and a panel discussion of people sharing ideas and examples that align with sustainable cost recovery ideas. And so what I'd like to propose today is, could the concept of sustainable cost recovery be helpful? Could it help us to have more aligned conversations? So we're speaking the same language, aligned in terms of the values and the outcomes we're pursuing, and a different discussion, one that is aware of the assumptions we're bringing to our conversations and asks critical questions. So what I'm going to share is structured in three parts. First of all, why? So what are three issues with our current conversations about financing urban sanitation? Then moving on to what? So a brief orientation to this idea of sustainable cost recovery, principles associated with it and its evolution over time. And finally, how? Ideas on how sustainable cost recovery might help us talk about financing urban sanitation in ways that drive citywide inclusive sanitation. So first of all, the why, sorry. So three issues with our current conversations. The first, gap talk. So we tend to talk a lot about the finance gap in sanitation, and that's of course super important, but I think it's also insufficient. Sometimes when we talk a lot about the quantity of the finance needed, that can take precedence over conversations about how that finance is managed, distributed, and what it can lead to in terms of equity and sustainability. We also have a tendency to follow fashions. That's very natural, but that also sometimes means that we don't take a step back and zoom out and see what some of the bigger questions could be. And finally, as we all know, there are persistent inequalities in urban sanitation. We know that investments in centralised systems more often benefit wealthier parts of urban areas, and it's really important that we keep questioning ourselves around who bears costs and who benefits. So moving on to the what I'd like to share is 3 principles of sustainable cost recovery. So the first is that sustainable cost recovery means that we have an appropriate mix of tariffs, taxes, and transfers to finance recurrent and capital costs and to leverage other forms of financing. So this won't seem new to many of you. It's the 3 T's. It's something we talk about a lot. But the key word I'd like to bring to it today is that word appropriate, and I'll come back to that a bit later in the presentation. Secondly, it's really important to have predictable public subsidies and public investment in sanitation. So that requires planning. And the key word there is predictability. So making sure that the public investment in sanitation is clear, it's planned, and it's secure. And finally, we need tariff policies that are affordable for all, including the poorest, while ensuring the financial sustainability of service providers. And the key message here is the idea of considering multiple cost perspectives. So focusing, instead of looking from one perspective of one actor, say the service provider, we need to actually consider all of the actors involved: government, service providers, and households or users. So briefly sharing the origins of sustainable cost recovery as a phrase. So it first came out strongly in 2003 in what's called the CAMDESIS panel's report. So from the World Panel on Financing Water Infrastructure. And essentially it was a bit of a hallmark moment in this multinational recognition that full cost recovery is generally not achievable in water infrastructure and water service delivery. It's since been talked about a lot in various OECD reports. It's got a place in urban water literature. It's very much tended to be associated with urban water. And what we're trying to do and to keep thinking about is how do we apply the concept in urban sanitation? Urban water is complicated enough. Urban sanitation is more complex. There's more actors involved, and there are different drivers around demand and different financing needs. But those 3 principles still hold relevance. And what we're trying to keep working on and thinking about is how the sustainable cost recovery principles can help us in thinking about urban sanitation financing. So taking one idea for each of the principles. First, for principle 1, on an appropriate mix of the 3 T's, what this requires is thinking through the different T's across the service chain, including who pays for what, how, and when. And the example on the screen, of course, you don't need to engage in the details. What it's essentially showing is that when you analyze on-site and off-site systems, you'll notice the different colors. And what that means is there are different cost implications for households, for service providers, and for governments. And what this means is that we need to be intentional about the mix of T's based on a sound understanding of implications for different actors and what's feasible. Secondly, we need predictable public investment in order to keep the whole system functioning, given that we know that full cost recovery is unrealistic. 2 brief examples here. The first is from an African city where there's an urban utility that receives around 30% of finance from the national government to cover sanitation costs. But predictability is a challenge. It's not a guaranteed amount of finance each year. And the second example is from a smaller city in Asia, and it's a situation where the local government is the service provider for an on-site dominated city. The service provider receives payments for desludging services, but those funds aren't earmarked for reinvestment in sanitation. And so what both of these examples show is that certain amounts of advocacy and use of networks are required to keep this finance coming. And that's really not enough. We can't be relying on those sorts of advocacy efforts year by year to ensure that public investment is predictable and comes through. And the third principle, which is about looking across multiple cost perspectives, what this means is that we need to consider both affordability for users and financial viability for service providers, and that can be a range of service providers when looking at sanitation, and particularly for on-site sanitation. There are multiple actors involved, and each of them bear and benefit from different kinds of costs and tariffs that are paid along the way. And the example on the right is a cost analysis of different actors in a system, and it's just showing that household investments can be substantial and aren't always made visible. And so it's really important to look from different perspectives when understanding urban sanitation costs. And for household perspectives, we tend to talk about affordability in relation to tariffs. And what this is saying is that we need to expand our view and consider the range of different costs borne by different actors. So ending today with an invitation. So as you listen to the presentations and the panel discussion that follows, please do have a think about how could these principles of sustainable cost recovery be helpful. Really look forward to hearing your thoughts. Please add them to the chat and to the Menti later on, and enjoy the presentations to come. Thanks, Juliet.
Thank you, Naomi. And with that and that introduction to sustainable cost recovery and the mix of the 3 T's, the predictability of public investment and the cost perspectives, I'm now going to hand to Didier Alleley. So he is a senior technical advisor in the Water, Sanitation, Hygiene and Health Unit at the World Health Organization. And he has over 30 years of experience in the sector, including 10 years, which have been developing WASH accounts, or what some of you may know by its previous terminology, TRACFIN, and providing support to countries to monitor financial flows to the sector. So with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Didier. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliette. This presentation on financial flows for urban sanitation draws on GLAS surveys and WASH accounts results from several countries, from at least one country. Next. Or can I change the slides myself? As you may already know, GLAS gives every 2-3 years a global update on WASH systems, including on finance. And WASH accounts that you mentioned, Juliette, are conducted by governments to present national snapshots of WASH financial flows and spending using a unified and comparable methodology called TRACFIN. Data are available online on the GLAS data portal at the address below. Next, yeah. Everybody would agree that there is not enough funding to meet global sanitation targets. Now, in the last GLAS survey, only 15% of countries reported sufficient funding to implement their sanitation national plans and reach their sanitation targets from all sources of funding. Countries with funding gaps most often cited limitations with capital expansion of services, O&M cost recovery, and limited human resources to implement programs and services. Next. To come back to the second point on the O&M, the same survey found that less than 40% of countries indicated tariffs were sufficient to cover at least 80% of O&M for urban sanitation. And as you can see, for drinking water, the situation is slightly better. This will necessarily have some impact on the sustainability of services, especially on sanitation. However, it seems that the data to assess the situation is not necessarily available and aggregated at national level, which makes it difficult to assess these national financial gaps. In fact, as you can see in the table, it seems that data to assess the situation at national level is not necessarily available and aggregated at that level, which makes it difficult to assess these national financial gaps. In fact, just before, in the last glass cycle, just 50%, one half of countries were able to provide information on WASH expenditure and sources of funding. This situation shows that financial data is very likely not available or not reported and aggregated at national level to obtain a detailed situation of the financial gaps in many countries. Next. Now, when data is available through WASH accounts, for example, it is possible to disaggregate the data into the origin of the fundings and the destination of the expenditures. Here is an example from Senegal. On the left, in urban, for large systems, that means sewer systems plus treatment, we can see that capital investment is mainly supported by central and subnational government funding, but also from tariffs and a little bit from repayable financing. O&M expenditures are financed by tariffs and a pretty large part from subsidies from the government. Compared to large systems presented on the right, large systems for drinking water, the figure on the right, it represents much higher level of spending, but large systems, large sanitation systems receive a lot more subsidies from the government. Next. For basic sanitation, still for urban, most of the capital investments comes from self-supply. That means the users, households, are paying for their own investments with a little bit of subsidies from central and subnational government. Operation and maintenance for basic sanitation is entirely covered by tariffs. Now, the question is, are tariffs and any sources of funding sufficient to cover O&M and sustain services? If this can be answered by utilities and by some project and pilot initiatives, it is actually difficult to assess the needs at national level. Next. Actually, while countries develop national plans for sanitation, they have very good estimates on investments needed to achieve national targets, national coverage. Very few plans give estimates on O&M to be recovered to sustain services. Based on my knowledge of countries which conducted WASH accounts, only one country was able to include in its national development plans estimates for O&M to be recovered to sustain services. Next. So from this situation, a few key implications and recommendations for urban sanitations we can provide. In order to understand potential gaps in financing, it is crucial to improve financial data collection from users, households especially, on self-supply. In many countries, self-supply represents the majority of the funding, especially in rural and in peri-urban, and tariffs paid by services. It is important to collect the data. It is also important to collect the data from service providers on sources of funding, including tariffs and subsidies, but also the segregation of costs, where the funding are going for investments or operation and maintenance and other costs. It is also important to develop and reinforce costed sanitation national plans, not only to assess financial needs for investments to increase access, but also to estimate operation and maintenance that will be necessary, the spending that will be necessary to sustain services. It is the comparison between costed plans and actual expenditures that will allow to assess existing financial gaps, particularly for recovering recurrent costs and looking at are tariffs sufficient to recover those costs. Thank you. Back to you, Juliette.
Thank you so much, Didier. And thank you for taking us from that gap talk into the question of the recurrent costs and into these themes that we have coming through around better data and better planning based on better data, which you will hear recurring through a few of the presentations. So thank you. We'll move now to a brief video which was developed by CEPT University in India about Sinnar municipality. So here we're zooming in on that question of the city level and how, not the gap talk, but the question of how the financial arrangements are set up in ways that help us have sustainable services and equitable services.
For building their own toilets, citizens can benefit from central, state and Sinnar subsidies. But subsidies only cover part of the cost.
उर्वरित जे पैसे आहेत ते सामान्य व्यक्तीनं स्वतःचं कॉन्ट्रिब्युशन किंवा मग इतर व्यक्तीकडनं कर्ज घेऊन स्वतःचं टॉयलेट बांधू शकतो.
माझ्याकडे फक्त तेव्हा 5,000 रुपये होते. मला त्यासाठी खडी वाळू वगैरे आणण्यासाठी पैसे कमी होते. त्यातून बचत गटातनं घेतले, काही शासनाकडनं घेतले. त्यानंतर मग टॉयलेट बांधलं तेव्हा परिस्थिती जरा व्यवस्थित झाली.
After community efforts, Sinnar was declared ODF on 22nd June 2017.
हमारा सिटी 3 जोन में डिवाइड किया है. हर जोन 1 साल में पूरा होता है. ऐसा 3 साल में 3 जोन करके पूरा सिटी हम डिसलज करते हैं.
The service is inclusive and covers all properties. The private operator provides longer pipes for areas that are not accessible by trucks, providing the reach to still desludge the septic tank.
We demonstrated that it is almost like emptying your garbage can every day, and this is the way that city all septic tank will be emptied once in 3 years.
But how is this service financed? Introducing PLAM. PLAM, or Performance Linked Annuity Model, is where the local government enters into a contract with the private sector. Here, properties don't pay desludging fees on service, but instead pay a small annual sanitation tax to the municipality. In turn, the municipality partners with the bank to set up an escrow account, and payments are released to the private company on satisfactory completion of monthly targets.
PLAM and the way it has been used with scheduled desludging also provides services citywide to each and every property owner, regardless of their tenure, regardless of their income group, which means that everybody, it's a very inclusive approach where everybody receives this service.
डेफिनेटली कर सकते हैं.
इसके लिए महाटेंडर पे डीबीओटी बेसिस पे टेंडर प्रोसीजर हुआ है जिसमें एक कॉन्ट्रैक्टर अलॉट किया हुआ है जो एफएसटीपी कंस्ट्रक्ट करेगा उसके बाद 3 साल O&M करेगा और बाद में काउंसिल को हैंड ओवर करेगा फर्दर ट्रीटमेंट के लिए।
Great. So hopefully what you can take from that is the need for subsidies to ensure equity, the idea of a sanitation tax, and the idea of when you build a treatment plant that you set it up with financial arrangements for operation, not just the building of the treatment plant. So we'll move here now to our panel, which is focused on public sector advances. And I'd like to just introduce our moderator, who is Rajiv Munankami, who is the multi-country program manager at SNV. And he's managing their urban sanitation program, which is across 5 countries in Asia and Africa, and which is introducing equitable and sustainable services, as well as looking at occupational health and safety of sanitation workers. So over to you, Rajiv.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Now I would like to invite you in this vital panel session on public sector advance on sustainable cost recovery for sanitation services. As we all know, sanitation for all needs financing for full life cycle cost. However, there are major gaps, as Dija has also presented from the GLASS report. And achieving sanitation as public service also requires distributing cost fairly and sustainability. But if we look in the current trend, much of the work on financing urban sanitation is focused on business models rather than the system, service system as a whole. But there's also a recognition that we need new innovation to consider urban sanitation from a public service perspective to restructure the way financial flows are understood and secured. We are honored to have public sector representatives from Indonesia, Ghana, and Bangladesh to delve into the crucial topic of financial mechanism for ensuring safe urban sanitation services. Our first panelist is Ms. Asri Indiani, who is serving as a board of directors for technical and business in PD Palja, Jakarta, Indonesia, which is a public sector company under provincial government. She had 17 years of experience on wastewater policy making, system designing, planning, and construction. Currently, she's managing wastewater service provided for Jakarta area. Our second panelist is Ms. Charlotte Aqua Aji. She's the program manager for Ministry of Sanitation and Water Resources, as well as the capacity building coordinator for Great Accra Metropolitan Area Sanitation and Water Project, which is funded by World Bank in Ghana. She had spent the last 2 decades working at the local, regional, and national levels in Ghana's water and sanitation sector, and is focused on inclusive approaches that benefit women, children, and individuals with disability. Last but not the least, our third panelist is Mr. Safikul Hussain from Bangladesh. He's the project director in Department of Public Health Engineering in Bangladesh. Mr. Hassan has more than 26 years of professional experience in WASH arena. He has wide experience managing large-scale projects in government of Bangladesh, targeting hard-to-reach areas and distressed people. He has been serving as project director of the project titled Urban Infrastructure Improvement Preparatory Facility, funded by Asian Development Bank, and holding the position of co-chair of Citywide Inclusive Sanitation Fecal Sludge Management Support Cell in DPHE. Now, I would like to invite our first panelist, Ms. Asri Indiani, as she is working in a public company owned by a provincial government, which has a mission to provide wastewater management services for both centralized and on-site system in Jakarta. But what we have heard is planning and financing for sanitation in cities, in towns, is often on ad hoc and piecemeal basis. Considering Jakarta's rapid growth and urbanization, what are some of the ways PD Palja manage financial flows to ensure equity in terms of everyone in Jakarta accessing a sanitation service? Over to you, Asha.
Okay. Hi, Rajiv. Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Here in Jakarta is already afternoon. I think in Stockholm is still in the morning. Can you all hear my voice clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Yeah. So,
Okay, great. Okay, so maybe I will just share some experience. Yes, Rajiv?
yeah, my question
Okay,
is considering
so I
Jakarta's
will
starting.
just share our experience. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Asha. Can you please share your experience from PD Paljaya on financial flows to ensure equity?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I think too, when we talk about the sustainability of services, we have to talk about how we maintain the service, not only the quality, but also to expand the service. For Paljaya, we are like have the responsibility to provide service for on-site and off-site system in DKI Jakarta. So the challenge is how to get enough revenue to cover both capex and opex. So for now, mostly our operational costs for OPEX, it can be managed by our revenue. While for the CAPEX, we still do combine source. Some part is from our revenue, but some part also given by the local government or by the national government. So the some of the infrastructure was built by the central government or the provincial government, but runs and operate by Paljaya. Our how can I say what we do here is to combine revenue from commercial and non-commercial for now. So the tariff for the household, of course, we need to put as low as possible because like we have not the area that is served by Paljaya is mostly low income people, yeah, for the households, but it's close to the commercial area, so we got a combination like a cross subsidized financing from the commercial area and also from the commercial area. But we also try to do diversification of our business core. So we have because like when we talk about sanitation, we have this cycle, yeah, from the containment and then from the transport and the treatment for the on-site and the off-site also we have. So we try to provide service for all the steps. So not only the area which have sewer network, but also for the area that needs on-site. So septic tanks. We also try to make septic tanks and sell septic tanks so people can buy from us. So it gives us more revenue also. So and we provide like a operational and maintenance for the treatment plant that is not under coverage of Paljaya. So Jakarta is still developed. So for the outer area of the current Paljaya service of sewer network, we also provide the operation and maintenance. So it's also help us to get more revenue to cover the OPEX. The other also, we try to, how can I say, have a collaboration with the local government to support the low income community to get the safely managed access by having the program of revitalization of the septic tank. So it's not 100% free because we try back then like a free program. It's very different than when the people pay but people only pay like for 1% or 3% of the cost, yeah. But the how can I say the people get more and more, how can I say, interest in the program. So this is like it's paid by the local government, but because it's our specialties, our expertise, yeah, by the operation like day by day. So the construction and the later on the septic dislodging and everything is done by Paljaya. There's some stuff that we do. So we also try to have a service for hazardous waste, especially the medical waste, and because we know the business of hazardous waste give more revenue, yeah, than sewerage, than the septic tank and also outside and offsite. So we try to get revenue from that, with hope that we can be able to get more fund, not only for the OPEX, to cover the OPEX, but for the future CAPEX, because we want to help Jakarta to increase, because the current basic access up to safely managed access. Like that, Rajiv, maybe from us for now.
Yeah, thank you, Astrid. You talked about diversification of services in order to expand the revenue stream. And as you said, like one of the major revenue stream is tariff of the services. So what kind of regulations are in place, like, I mean, based on which you are developing a tariffs?
Actually, unfortunately for now, like DKI Jakarta haven't had like a specific regulation for wastewater management, because that's what we are not currently under development. But for now is like under like a government decree of the tariff. So the tariff is like regulated by the government, by the governor of DKI of Jakarta, and the tariff, it cannot be increased like gradually. So our current tariff is like 10 years ago. So it's already 10 years with the same tariff. So we are kind of struggle with that. But that's why we try to have another services, like extra service, as I told you, because those kind of services is not yet established by tariff of the government decree. So we are more flexible with that.
So, I mean, you're saying that tariff guideline is a little bit old, but in order to increase your revenue stream, you are diversifying your services. Thank you very much, Ashley, for now.
Exactly.
I'll get back to you later, time permits. Our second panelist is from Ghana, Ms. Charlotte Akwaji. As Ghana is one of the most urbanized countries in Africa, and urban infrastructure has not kept pace with the city's expansion, and sanitation has not been a priority in public funding, and household bear the bulk of the cost. There are number of urban sanitation projects upcoming, and there are legal policies, strategies, frameworks, and also initiative to develop sanitation action plan for all leading urban centers to keep pace with urbanization. In that context, what are the financing options your ministry is exploring to overcome challenges for ensuring sanitation infrastructure and also ensuring affordability of sanitation services for all in Ghana? Charlotte?
Thank you very much, and greetings to all our participants. For Ghana, as you rightly said, rural-urban migration and population growth is actually widening the gap of sanitation in the urban space. So for government of Ghana, we are using a lot of tools to be able to close those gaps. Our financing sources mostly is government allocations, development partners, we have internal generating funds, we have grants and loans as well. And then we have the user fees, or what we call beneficiary contributions. But for now, for us to be able to accelerate and close the gaps, government of Ghana have a flagship intervention program, the Gamma Sanitation and Water Project, which is being implemented through equity and equality solutions. So there is a subsidized products, or there's a subsidy on our technology for the low-income urban communities, where the beneficiaries pay just a percentage, a little percentage, and governments take the cost of the toilets. But this is basically for us to be able to serve the vulnerable population. And our cities are growing a lot of informal settlements. And we are exploring even financing systems that are also being used in the high-income communities. So our largest slum that we call Ashaman in the city, Accra, we have been able to put a simplified sewage system for us to be able to have connections in these informal communities. And we have been able to provide household toilets to over 50,000 households in the two big cities, Accra and Kumasi. And government plans to upscale this intervention to all our urban cities in Ghana. If we look at the service provider, the SME, the artisans who are in this low-income community providing services, we fund the capacity development of our artisans, we fund research in the technologies and all that to be able to have these solutions in our urban space. But that is just the one level of the service chain. If we want to achieve safely managed sanitation, the capital investment in the infrastructure itself, the sanitation infrastructure, the treatment plan, the FSTPs and all that. So in the year 2021, the Energy Levy Act of Ghana 2015 was amended. And there is now inclusion of sanitation and pollution tax. So every petrol or diesel that is purchased in Ghana, there is a 10%, there's a 10 pesewa that you pay that goes into this fund. And basically for us to be able to improve the quality of sanitation in an urban areas, this will pay for CapEx of sanitation infrastructure, and then also take care of the operation and maintenance of this sanitation infrastructure. Like the financial flow basically mentioned that most of the sanitation infrastructures are not able to repay or even keep the operation and maintenance. This is where the sanitation and pollution levy will have a dedicated funding to be able to take care of that. And then also be able to widen the scope, the spatial disparity of services between the slums and then the middle income. So you'll be able to complement subsidies for the vulnerable population to be able to enjoy the same sanitation services. Then we'll be able to achieve safely managed. So you provide a subsidy at the household level, and then you also have finances to put up the treatment systems that will be able to treat your waste to be able to achieve the safely managed sanitation along the whole value chain. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charlotte, for sharing the initiative from Government of Ghana for like polluters pay and the sanitation levy also bringing in revenue from other sector as well. Thank you very much. Now I would like to go for the last panelist, Mr. Safikul Hassan from Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, there are a lot of urban sanitation program upcoming, and almost like 100 plus FSTPs are being planned and will be commissioned within 2025. Safika, based on your experience, like how is the government thinking about ensuring the ongoing financial viability of service providers for the many FSTPs that are under construction in Bangladesh, while at the same time also ensuring equity and affordability of the service recipients?
Thank you, Mr. Rajiv, today's moderator, and good afternoon from Bangladesh, those who are joining to this session. Yes, this is a very time-bound question now in Bangladesh, how this FSTP will be run and other things. As you know, in Bangladesh, we are implementing more than 115 municipalities for the FSTP projects. As you know, the government is now operate 1 to 2 years. Some of the projects is running 3 years operation maintenance in build the project. So these times, people will get the benefit from the projects, and they will also habituate with the system, and by this time our city levels management will learn how to run the FSTP and what should be their tariff and other things. As you know, from the 2020, we are following the Swiss concept in our sanitation projects and ensuring the Swiss pillars like accountability, sustainability, responsibility, resource planning. These all are now considering in our development projects for the FSTPs and the sanitation projects. And also now in Bangladesh, we are following the integrated waste management issues, not only the FSM, it is integrated waste management issues as well. But tariff is a big issue because any tariff fixed by the government, they are not willing to pay to the people. So we are try to motivate our people through different campaigning program, different capacity building program to the city people, what should be their responsibility, how they ensure their accountability, also the city peoples, and what should be their technology. This type of initiatives we are taking in our projects and try the business model in different like micro level PPP and waste workers associations, entrepreneur or cooperatives. That type of activities we are now taking for the sanitation improvement issues.
Thank you.
And also, you know, in Bangladesh, we have some good practices already we have, because out of 329 municipalities, we have the 4 WASAS areas. These 329 municipalities, we have nowadays 12 FSTPs running. And these 12 FSTPs, there are different models is there. So we are trying to replicate the good on which one is good for the others. That type of initiatives we have taken. Thank you, Mr. Rajiv.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hassan. Yeah, considering the time, like financing urban sanitation topic is very complex, and within 20 minutes, like we got examples and experience from three countries. Everyone talked about the innovative ways they are getting in order to get all the 3 T's, like tariff setting. All the countries said about the tariff setting guideline, what are the issues for the transfers as well, like the example from Ghana on energy or sanitation levy, and for the taxes, the Bangladesh case, and we also heard from Sinner. So there are like a lot of innovations is being done, and the process has started, and we are in the right direction. Hope we will be able to crack this. So I would like to thank everyone. Unfortunately, because of the time, I have to close this session. Over to you, Julia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you so much to our 3 panelists. If anyone has further questions they'd like to ask them, please use the chat over these next 10 minutes. They're here with us, and feel free. And meanwhile, we'll just move to a final presentation, which will be from Vijay Balaki, and he is co-founder and partner of Athena Infonomics, and he is part of their development finance advisory group, so definitely in the right field. And he works very closely with institutional investors, development financiers, impact investors, and government. And so with that, over to you, Vijay.
Thanks very much, Juliet. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And good morning to everyone from Washington, D.C. It's really very early in the morning here. So I think at the outset, if you can go to the next slide, I'll I wouldn't want to labor on this, but just maybe touch upon a few high notes. So if you distill down the feedback and the comments that we've received from the speakers over the last several minutes, is the fact that financing is all about matching, right? Finding opportunities to match, the cash flows that come through transfers, tariffs, or taxes to the cash flows that are required to operate and invest into infrastructure, as well as to run the day-to-day operations of these complex assets. So it's fundamentally a problem of managing cash flows. If you take a very financing kind of a lens. On the other hand, if you look at the business models, right, sanitation and water are natural monopolies, so their business models are fairly straightforward. However, the fact that you have coexistence of several providers and interdependence of these several providers on each other is what makes the whole financing game a little bit more complex. So there are two broad areas if you were to approach how to fix this problem of financial sustainability, again, using a kind of a very finance first approach. You have to look at it in the context of either increasing the demand or reducing costs. And there are a whole bunch of measures that one could do in terms of managing either the costs, like, how do you improve the quality of infrastructure and design infrastructure in very sort of appropriate way that suits the conditions of the local market. How can you potentially blend different sources of finance to bring down the costs of financing? On the other hand, when you look at increasing demand, how do you improve access, enforce through regulations, ensure that the infrastructure and facilities being created convenient for usage, and provide incentives. So there are different things that you could do there. Next, please. So the problem at the heart of it is what we would call, as what institutional investors would call, is the problem of structural opaqueness, right? And a typical sanitation financing project wouldn't pass muster with institutional investors because of this fundamental problem of being set up in a model where it's structurally opaque to really understand these connections and then be able to simulate these connections. And that's precisely where EquiServe comes in. It's an attempt to address this problem of structural opaqueness. It's a platform that engages with system data, which is data at the city level, and also allows you to sort of plug into the data that's available across different providers, and then be able to simulate a range of future outcomes. And you can pull different levers, both on demand side as well as on the cost management side, to simulate outcomes for the future. So basically, EquiServe helps you boil down at least the financing question to what are the gaps, how are you going to bridge it, why should you be bridging those gaps, for whom and how. Next, please. So here is an example of, we've deployed this tool now in several cities, and this is an example where you can see a city exploring between two distinct alternatives in terms of investments and the impact that these different alternatives have on both financial sustainability goals as well as social, environmental, and economic goals for that particular city. So I'll probably pause there and hand it over to Juliet. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Vijay. Really, really helpful, and so helpful to see a tool that can help, as you say, remove some of the opaqueness about all these different financial flows that I think particularly for the sanitation sector, perhaps way more than the water sector, is so complex because you have so many different actors. So thank you. So again, please use the chat if you have questions for Vijay. He'll be here and able to answer. And with that, we're coming up to the last 5 minutes of this session. And I'd like to introduce Upasana Yadav, who is a program lead at the Centre for Water and Sanitation, CWAS, at CEPT University, so from whom we saw the video earlier. So Upasana has worked for 12 years in WASH and urban development, and working across a range of areas, including city sanitation plans, public finance, business models, and innovative financing mechanisms. So I'd like to hand to her to give us some closing remarks. Thanks, Upasana.
Thank you so much, Juliet, and good afternoon from India. So in closing, let me re-emphasize the importance of the sustainable cost recovery and reflect the three key takeaways from our deliberation today. So I think first and foremost important is water and sanitation as a public good service. We all know that historically water and sanitation is viewed as a public good service, and because of that reason, many citizens do not perceive them as a basic service to pay for it. And therefore, in such situation, the government is going to play a crucial role in financing the services. So along with the tariff and the user charges, the government transfers as well as the subsidies is going to play a pivotal role. And as was mentioned earlier, the predictability of these transfers will be very important. The example that we have seen earlier is from the Bangladesh, which illustrated how the transfer from the local central government and allocation in the budget helped them in operating the waste treatment facility. The second key takeaway is equity and inclusivity. I think so while pursuing the cost recovery, it is equally important that the equitable sanitation service is provided to all the segments of the society. And for this, we have seen the examples of cross-subsidization, multiple cost perspective, and the targeted intervention, which is going to play a crucial role. I think the example from the Ghana and Jakarta had illustrated very well how the cross subsidies have helped them in achieve the safe sanitation system. And the third key takeaway, which is the most important, is also the data for the decision making. I think we all know that data is really important when it comes to the financial planning. Without data, we cannot even calculate the cost recovery or predict the financial flows and even run the financial models, which were shown earlier. So I think the data-driven monitoring systems is also going to play a crucial role when we have to look back and refine our cost recovery strategies. The example from the sender in India had showcased how the online monitoring system helped them in achieving the success of the performance-linked annuity model. So let me conclude by saying that sustainable cost recovery is not only about financing. Of course, it's important, but there are other aspects that we also need to look at. We need to create a resilient ecosystem, which includes equity, collaboration between the multiple actors, creating a robust regulatory framework, and also a good monitoring system. So thank you. Over to you, Juliet.
Great. Thank you so much for that summary, Upasana. And I hope that our participants in this session have put some good takeaways from this session on sustainable cost recovery. I won't re-summarize, as you've just heard a summary from Upasana, but I will say that it's an area that we and all the others presenting in this session are continuing to work on. So you can look to follow any of us on LinkedIn or our organizational sites, or find ways to contact people direct if you want to continue a conversation. But I do hope that you take away the 3 T's and how we can have an appropriate mix for sanitation, that we really need to see it, as Upasana said, as a public service. And finally, that we should make sure we focus on equity. And that means we need to look at the multiple cost perspectives. So thank you, everyone, and all our panelists and presenters for this session, and enjoy the rest of the conference this week. Thanks so much.